Really good to be with you this morning. In the past, Adu has spoken to congregations, and at the end of his talk, people would tell me I didn't understand anything he said. So we're trying to kind of make it a little easier on you to understand. So this morning I won't be speaking. I'm going to bring you the report on the work. I do encourage you after class and after service to talk to Adu, ask any questions you might have. But hopefully you'll be able to understand me a little bit better than you can Nigerian English, that we call Nigerian English. This year is the silver anniversary for Nigerian Christian School. In 1999, Adu started the school in the middle of the jungle after clearing the trees, leveling the land, and building the first 4 classroom blocks in the center of the campus. A Christian school began. He used his own land that he inherited for the school. Within a couple of years, there were over 1,000 students attending that school. Today, Adu provides a Christian education for children from preschool through high school. The school consists of numerous classroom buildings, technical buildings, cafeteria, and administrative buildings. There are dorms on the campus with bathhouses for the children that live on campus. There's also housing for some of the teachers on campus. The school now uses solar systems and a generator to provide electricity for the school, and they have a well with a water tower to provide water for the school. You know, the Dayton Church of Christ, I was going back and trying to look see how far back y'all go in supporting the work, and my records went back to 2017, but the job started before then, so I don't know exactly what year it was, but I know since 2017 I got you on my spreadsheet, so and I'm sure it was several years prior to that, so we're thankful for you supporting this work. Some of my fondest memories of going to Nigerian Christian Academy is just walking around the campus and watching all the students, seeing all the students, and I've been blessed to see hundreds and hundreds of young children flourishing and happy in a jungle environment. Learning about God and the church, that's what the important thing is. Because of this school, children that were once lost with no hope now have Jesus and have an education to help them get through life. I've also enjoyed watching the progress as much needed buildings have been added through the years. It's just really been a great joy to have gone over there and seen this work. I have some great older pictures back when I first started going over there of the students with me, and I cherish those. The campus has grown to be one of the best schools in the state. The school had a great celebration on September the 5th and the 6th, it being their silver anniversary of 25 years. And it was a success, a wonderful success. And Adu is still tired from all the work he put into that. He worked all summer long preparing for that celebration. Guests from the government attended. They had a representative from the governor's office, the deputy governor's office, and the minister of education attended this event. And there were also other prominent politicians that came. I remember, I think it was my first trip to Nigeria, I found that how much the people there and even the government officials appreciate Nigerian Christian Academy. I was able to go. Adu took us to meet the governor and talk to the governor, and so it's just so good to see that the government is really backing his work over there. At this celebration, about 50 elders attended from different congregations, from different villages, and they were honored with gifts from the students and from the school, and I'm so thankful that he was able to do that. The students had a parade around the community, around the village, and there were many guest speakers there, and they had previous graduates that came and shared their experiences and their successes because of their education at Nigerian Christian Academy. You know, we've got people that have graduated there that are doctors and nurses and all types of careers that they were able to go into because of the education they got at Nigerian Christian Academy. So it was a great celebration, and a lot of people learned a lot about the school. In the 2023-2024 school year, there was approximately 450 students, combined students, in the primary and secondary schools. Now, the reason that number is lower than when the school originally started is because shortly after the school started in 1999, within a few years, at that time the education in Nigeria parents had to pay for their kids to go to public school. And so, since they had to pay, once they could afford to send their kids to school, decided that they would send their kids to the Christian school. That was really great. But then the government stopped charging for education, so some of the parents chose to go to public school. So that's why the number has dropped. But even to have 450 students in the jungle going to school is just an amazing feat. This year they had 35 high school students that graduated. Out of that 35, 28 of these students obeyed the gospel before they graduated from high school. So that was a great thing to hear. The 2024-2025 school year started on September the 2nd. So the school started before he even came over here. So he is worn out. I can tell you, he's retired from all that's been going on. So by the time he gets home, he'll have to hit the road running again. Adu has started another class at the school, which I think is a great thing for the students. He is building a laboratory for medical testing in the school. And students will be chosen to attend this class, and they're going to learn how to draw blood and test it for different diseases such as AIDS, COVID, and malaria. It's also going to be a great asset to the community because there's no hospital there. They've got to go to a city to see a hospital. So at least now they can come and get tested. And at the same time, we have students that are learning to be able to go out and work in the medical field when they graduate. So this is a great thing. He's getting started. He's still collecting money to buy the equipment needed. Aid for the Christian widows in this area has been a great success. Adu gives them food and clothing and other items that they need on a bi-monthly basis. He holds a big event for them in December on the 31st each year, feeding them, giving them a nice meal and gifts, and they sing and pray and spend time together at all of these events. I was amazed to see how many widows are in Nigeria, Christian widows are there in Nigeria. So many of the men get killed in auto accidents and motorcycle accidents, because motorcycles is a big mode of transportation over there, and so a lot of them are killed, and so there's just a lot of widows over there, along with diseases they have to fight. So I'm not sure how many widows normally come to your events that you have for them. 55. 35, I'm sorry. See, I can't even understand. 35 widows in this little jungle village that are members of the church. So this is a really good work that he does to help them, and you could always use a little extra help there. All of Adu's family is doing well. EFEP, that's his oldest son, is now the director of the school. He serves under his father, and we're so thankful for that because for many years, a lot of supporters have questioned who's going to take over this work when Adu's gone. And it's so good to know that his oldest son is already migrating into that position. His next son is going to college, and hopefully he will also want to be a part of the school as he graduates from school. His older daughter works in the city, and his youngest daughters are attending Nigerian Christian Academy. And all of this is possible because of your support through the years. You know, supporting mission work is kind of like investing money. If you invest a little bit each month, the principal grows, and with compound interest, the growth just gets bigger and bigger. So as Christian students graduate and go out into the society in Nigeria, we will never know how many people that they bring to Christ because of what they learned at Nigerian Christian Academy. So it's a great investment. So the more students that go to that school and become Christians and graduate and go back out in the world, the bigger impact it's having on Nigeria. And that's really what we all want to hope. This morning I want to do something a little different just for a few minutes. I'd like to just share a lesson with you. And then at the end of class, if we have a little time, I'll let you ask questions. But this is a lesson I put together last year, and I think it's really needed in the church, everywhere. And it's a lesson on forgiveness. You know, when a child does something wrong, and like writing on the wall with a magic marker, or cutting their hair off with a pair of scissors, or kicking the dog, or throwing a temper tantrum, and you people that are parents, you can relate to these things. we as parents usually have to discipline that child. Depending on their age and the circumstances, discipline could be as light as a timeout in the room or as hard as a spanking. And after the discipline is over, almost every time that child will come to you, not verbally, but physically seeking forgiveness. Sometimes they may slip into your lap or come and hug you. Sometimes they go and hide because they're embarrassed or ashamed of what they've done. But regardless, they need that forgiveness from you. They want to make sure that they're accepted. And that's something that's built into all of us. All of us, when we've made mistakes, have this need for forgiveness. And that's part of God's plan. When we discipline our children, we need to reassure them that we love them and that everything's okay. And I think that all of you as parents understand that. Until they get that forgiveness, until they get that acceptance again, whatever they did wrong will continue to haunt them. And so they desperately need our forgiveness. This idea is not just for children, it affects us all. When my youngest brother was little, he did something wrong and lied to my mom about it. I don't remember what he did. I think he tried to flush the puppy down the toilet. I think that's what it was, I'm not sure. But my mom sat him down and told him that since he lied to her, she couldn't trust him anymore. And as a child, my brother really took that hard. It devastated him. It was a hard lesson, but one that taught him well. Today, my brother, he's 56 years old and he preaches, and I don't know how many times that he has mentioned that story in his lessons because it had such an impact on him. He'll tell you that losing his mother's trust was one of the hardest things he had to deal with as a child. So thankfully, he has regained that trust of his mom, and he is doing a lot better. So as we talk about forgiveness, I want to just share some things with you. The need to forgive someone comes in different degrees of difficulty, right? For example, it's easier to forgive a family member, someone that you're real close to, than it is to forgive others. It's easy to forgive someone that may have hurt someone else. For example, if someone here hurt James, I can forgive you pretty easy. It might be a little harder for him, but it's easy for me to forgive you for doing something to someone else, but maybe not so hard if you did it to me. So we can hurt people in many ways. We can hurt them physically, we can hurt them emotionally or mentally, and then it's important that we ask for forgiveness, but also give forgiveness when that time comes. The greater the wrong, the harder it is to forgive, right? If somebody's really done you wrong, it's harder to forgive them if they just done something a little bit not so hard to you. But for the sinner, this is really important. This is really what my lesson's about this morning. For the sinner, the greater the sin, the greater forgiveness is needed. Today I want to talk about 3 stories, okay, of forgiveness. The first one happened in my lifetime. The second one happened around 4,000 years ago. And the third one, if we have time to do that, also happened in my lifetime. So this is a true story about a family of 3. Frank and Elizabeth Morris. They only had one son. His name was Ted Morris. Ted was 18 years old and had just started attending David Lipscomb University 3 months earlier. He and his parents were very close. All his grandparents lived nearby. Frank and Elizabeth, his parents, had been reminiscing about how they loved their home and looked forward to the day their grandchildren would be running around the property. Life was good. They were a strong Christian family and they loved the Lord. They all cherished their nightly prayers together as they sit together before bedtime and pray. But on Christmas Eve, 1982, a young man named Tommy Pagage, who was 26 years old, was driving down the highway near his home at a high rate of speed. He was so intoxicated, he passed out at the wheel. As the car continued speeding down the road, meanwhile, young Ted Morris was headed home for Christmas on the same highway. It was 10:30 p.m. As Tommy was crossing a bridge, his car crossed over the center line and hit Ted's car head-on. Tommy was driving a big car, weighed about 5,000 pounds, while Ted's car only weighed about 3,000 pounds. The crash was so horrific that first responders could barely get a hand in the wreckage just to see if Ted was still alive. He was, but barely. They had to use the jaws of life to extract him and rush him to the hospital. His mother, Elizabeth, received a call from a nurse that told her she needed to get to the hospital as quick as she could. She called her husband, Frank, who was about an hour and a half away. They both raced to the hospital to see what was wrong with their son. The nurse would not allow them to go back and see Ted because they were still fighting to save his life. Frank finally forced his way back into the emergency room. On the way in, he came across a belligerent drunk man in the ER. He did not know until later that it was Tommy Pagage, the one who had hit his son. As Frank forced his way into his room, he was shocked to see how bad his son looked. His neck was broken, and he was banged up all over. To make a long story short, young Ted Morris passed away from his injuries. It was 2:30 on Christmas morning, a day when most people were getting ready to celebrate the birth of Christ. Frank and Elizabeth were mourning the loss of their son, their only son. They were devastated. When police were interviewing Tommy Pagage, who was barely injured in the crash, they found out that Tommy didn't even know he was in an accident. He was so drunk he didn't remember anything. Meanwhile, as Frank and Elizabeth went back to their home, totally broken after losing their only son, they began looking at the Christmas decorations all around the house. Elizabeth was so distraught that she just started ripping the garland off of the staircase. Christmas would never be the same again for that family. Tommy was arrested for DUI and vehicular homicide. He received 10 years sentence in prison, but only had to serve 5 years. Frank and Elizabeth struggled with hate for Tommy. They hated him, but realized that they had to figure out a way to forgive their son's murderer. Elizabeth began visiting Tommy in prison. And when Tommy got out of prison, the Morris family started treating him like their own son. Eventually, Frank studied with him and baptized him into Christ. This is a story of how a Christian family worked through their pain to forgive a young drunkard and murderer who needed forgiveness. Another great part of this story is how forgiveness and love brought a lost young man to Christ. Frank and Elizabeth turned their hatred into love and treated him like their own story. And this is a special story to me because Ted was my cousin. And I hadn't forgotten that story. So before I read the next story, I wanted to share some scriptures with you because I think it's important to understand that Jesus himself basically taught forgiveness throughout his whole lifetime here. If you remember when he taught his disciples to pray in Matthew chapter 6, verse 9 through 15, what we call the Lord's Prayer, one of the things we learned in that prayer, and after the prayer he explained it to his disciples, was that if we don't forgive other people, God will not forgive us. So it's important to learn to forgive. In John 8, verses 3 through 11, we see the story of the adulterous woman where the scribes and Pharisees brought this adulterous woman to Jesus trying to trick him. And we see there as he sent them away after using some wisdom and asked them for the first one to throw a stone to make sure he had no sin in his life. Anyway, he sent them away and he told the woman to go and sin no more. He forgave her. In Luke 23, verse 39 through 43, we see the story of the thief on the cross. We see two thieves on either side of Jesus. One of them is making fun of Jesus, and the other one was correcting him and telling him, listen, we deserve to be here. Jesus did not deserve to be there. And we know that Jesus forgave that thief and told him today you'll be with me in paradise. Luke 23, 33, we see where Jesus on the cross said, Father, forgive them for they know not what they're doing. Forgiveness, that's something very important to Jesus, and he wants us to be the same way. And I think another interesting story in the book of Acts chapter 7, verse 60, is where Stephen, as he's being stoned to death, he did the same thing. He said, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And I can't help but think that he learned that from Christ's teaching. So we need to learn to forgive. Second story I want to share with you this morning story of Jacob and Esau found in Genesis chapter 25, verses 20 through 27. You know they were twin brothers. You know that Isaac and Rebekah were their parents. All of you should be familiar with this story. And when Jacob and Esau were born, Esau was born first, and we know that Jacob was holding on his ankle as he was being born. We also know that based on Jewish law, the oldest son would always receive the blessing from his father. He would receive the legal birthright for his family. In this case, Esau should be the one to receive that blessing. We know that he didn't, but there were a lot of benefits from being the firstborn son at that time. In this case, the birthright included Abraham's mantle. That was a big deal back then. The promise God made to Abraham would continue through that birthright, and it would also make him head over the entire family. Big deal. That was a big deal back then. You know the story about the pregnancy that Rebekah had, and that she was had a hard pregnancy because the boys were always kicking and moving around. So Rebekah prayed to God, and God told her in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23, he said this, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. As the 2 boys grew up, Esau became skillful in hunting. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob was more of a peaceful guy that lived in tents. Isaac, we know, loved Jacob because he loved Esau because he was a hunter. He liked eating that wild game. Rebekah loved Jacob because of his peaceful nature. And one day, Jacob had cooked a pot of stew. Esau came in from the field, and he was starving. You know, when you really think about what's going to happen here, he must have really been hungry. More than just, I missed a meal. It tells us he was hungry, he was starving. So he asked Jacob for some of the stew, and Jacob said he could have some, but only if he sold his birthright to him. And the reason we know that Esau had to be really hungry because he agreed, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. In Genesis 27:1, we find that Isaac was old and nearly blind. He did not know how much longer he would live, so he decided to go ahead and give the blessing to Esau. He told Esau to take his bow and go out into the field and hunt some game. Then he wanted him to fix him a good meal, and after that he would bless him before he died. Rebekah heard this conversation. She devised a plan to deceive Isaac so Jacob could receive the blessing. She told Jacob to prepare some goat meat for his father. And since Esau was a hairy man and Jacob was not, Rebekah had Jacob put on one of Esau's coats. She took a goat skin and put it on Jacob's hand and neck so that if Isaac touched him, he would think it was Esau. Very deceitful. When Jacob took the food to his father, he lied and told him he was Esau. Isaac was suspicious and asked him how he could have gone hunting and come back so soon. He also did not think it was Esau's voice, but after touching him and smelling the coat, he was convinced it was Esau, so Isaac kissed his son and eventually gave him the blessing. After Jacob left, his brother Esau returned. He was angry to find out his brother had deceived Isaac and received the blessing. He was so angry that he planned on killing Jacob after the death of Isaac. Rebekah heard this and told Jacob to escape to Haran to stay with his uncle Laban until Esau calmed down. It was several years before Jacob saw his brother again. It's a great story. Go back and read the story, because as Jacob is traveling and he's headed towards Esau, he was so afraid that Esau would kill him and kill off his family that he split up all of his possessions and his people just in case Esau came and was angry, and that way he could at least save some of his family. But when Esau saw him, he forgave him, he hugged him, and he kissed him. It took a little while to get that forgiveness, didn't it? But forgiveness is important. Since he received the birthright, he became a part of the genealogy of Christ. And you can read that genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. I love reading that. Some people say, I hate those lists of names, but if you start reading it and start thinking about the people that were in Christ's genealogy, I think it becomes more interesting. Esau was not a part of the genealogy. Now, the last story I want to share with you is called The Story of Mr. D, another true story. It was about a dear friend of mine that I knew years ago, very close to him, and my wife was as well, him and his wife. And they were much older than us, but they had no children, so they kind of just took us in. I mean, we both had parents, but they kind of took us in and treated us like their own children. They were very good to us through the years. I used to go hunting and fishing with him a lot. We spent a lot of time at their dinner table. They just really took us in and took care of us. But as they got older, they needed help. Help was failing, so we tried to help them, tried to be there for them. We actually moved in with them for 7 months to try to take care of them. She battled lung cancer, and he also had some health problems. The man's wife, she passed away first. It wasn't long before the man passed away. While in the hospital, I was sitting with Mr. D, and he received a phone call. And when he answered the phone, he immediately hung up. And I asked him, I said, who was that? He told me it was his sister. See, years earlier, something happened between him and his sister that he didn't like. And he just kind of cut her off. It wouldn't have nothing to do with her. This went on for years, probably a decade. And here he was dying in the hospital, and she calls to check on him, and he hung up on her. So he did not forgive her. He went to his grave without forgiving her. I got to meet her before she passed away. I'd never met her before. And I found out that she was a fine Christian woman. That she loved her brother. But for some reason, he chose not to forgive her. She needed that forgiveness. She wanted that forgiveness desperately, but she never received it. And it haunted her until she died. But thankfully, being a good Christian woman, we know that she was forgiven by God, her Father. In these 3 stories, we find lessons that we can learn from. First, we find someone that needed forgiveness. Second, we find someone who needed to forgive. Third, we find that forgiveness may take time to receive or to give out sometimes. Fourth, we see someone who refused to forgive. And fifth, we can see the hand of God in the first 2 stories. And last of all, we can see how Satan can make someone so bitter to the point of not being able to forgive. That story will haunt me. So I wanted to share those with you this morning, along with the presentation on May's Word. I don't know how much time we've got left, but until the bell rings the second time, I'll take questions, and maybe Amy might want to get up here and answer some of those questions. Any questions about the work in Nigeria? Don't be bashful. Yes, ma'am.
Is there persecution against Christians in Nigeria?
If you couldn't hear the question, she said, is there persecutions against Christians in Nigeria? And the answer is yes, especially in the northern half of Nigeria. That is where most of the Muslim population is. And as you know, the Muslims are very, they hate Christians. And a lot of Christians have been killed in the north. You know that we've had Christian schools attacked. We've had, a few years ago, there was a hospital attacked, and one of the doctors out of Nashville, I remember the church, who was a surgeon, was there, and he ended up getting shot in the arm, and it ruined his career. So yes, there's a lot of persecution in Nigeria. There's a lot of danger in Nigeria. I've not been able to go back because it is pretty dangerous over there. All of you that have been here coming a while, you know, he's been robbed, he's been shot, he's been kidnapped. I mean, he's had a lot of things happen to him, and because of that, he has a compound wall around his home just to protect him and his family. It's about 12 foot tall. It has embedded glass along the top of the wall's concrete. It's embedded glass to keep people from climbing over. Because of the kidnapping he had a few years ago, the government decided to give him armed guards 24 hours a day to protect him. And that's sad that you have to live in that kind of environment, but that's what he lives in. They live at his home at night. They stay at his home at night. He has to provide them a place to stay and also feed them. But they go to school with him. They come home with him, and so that's the kind of danger he deals with every day over there. So good question. Any other comments or questions? Okay, back to you.
Do Muslims seek to take over Nigeria similar to what we're doing in Europe right now?
She won't know if the Muslims are taking over Nigeria. And in some ways, that's correct, right? The Muslims, they are. And the sad thing about it, because there's so many of them now, that most of their public officials are getting elected that are Muslims, you know. Is your governor a Muslim today? He's the governor of his state is a Muslim today. So, is that my 5-minute warning? Okay. Any other questions?
Tell us a little bit more about the number of baptisms and conversions.
Okay, baptisms and conversions. Is that something that you like to talk about? Would you like to come up and talk about it? You want me to talk about it? Go ahead. Okay, as I mentioned a while ago, out of 35 graduates this year, 28 of them have obeyed the gospel. And but the church is growing over there. The church that he attends, here's the situation with AJ. Because he is involved in several churches, he's planted several churches in these different villages, he does have to travel around a lot. But he does have his home congregation called the Garage Church of Christ. And the reason it's called the Garage Church of Christ is because it started in his garage. How many members do you have there now? 120? 120, that's adults, correct? That's baptized. They count the baptized adults in their congregation. It doesn't count the children. So 120 in this little village congregation where he attends. I failed to mention that he still has a preaching school going. He has a preaching school going, and thankfully, one of the young men that came out of the preaching school, named Godwin Johns, as soon as he got out of the preaching school, Adu asked us if we could help support him. And he is preaching in a little village called Tyson, and the church he preaches at is called the Tyson Church of Christ. And he started preaching before he ever got married, before he ever had children. And he was several years before he got married, and then now he's married, and man, he's got what, 4 or 5 children now before him. So he's got a lot of children, but he's still preaching. The church is growing there. All these little village churches are growing. He has a church in the school because you have a lot of students that live on campus, and so they have church services in the school. And talking about living on campus, there's a lot of orphans over there. I talked about widows, but there's a lot of orphans. And he takes in as many orphans as he can do. As a matter of fact, right now, he's taking in a young girl that's actually living with him and going to school. And he has other orphans that live in the school year-round. Even when the school is out for the summer, they still live there because they have nowhere to go. So that's another thing that's going on over there. But the churches are growing. Any other comments?
Are graduates of the school helping to fund the program?
He asked, are graduates that attended the school, do they help fund the program? They do. Okay. He said they do. And I'm sure, especially the ones that, I got to meet one of the doctors that graduated. He was a doctor, and his wife was a nurse. I got to meet them, I think, the last time I was over there. And those people are more able to help fund than the average person over there, because the average income is so low over there. I haven't looked at it lately, but I think the last time I looked at the average income in Nigeria is $400 or $500 a month. But it's nothing like that in the village where he goes. I'll give you an example. He has someone change the oil and filter in his car for him. He buys the parts, and he's not a mechanic. He'll tell you real quick. And the guy only charges him $8 to change his oil and filter, and that's a lot of money for him to be able to do that. So, yeah, the income in those villages is low. The higher incomes are in the cities where they do have some jobs. There's a lot of people live on the streets of the cities, and if you think we have a lot of homeless, you've not seen anything. You think, I don't know how it is here in Dayton, but you get in Nashville area, places like that, just about every corner, you got someone there asking for food, asking for money. That's a big thing in the cities in Nigeria because there's just not enough jobs and not enough places for people to work. Good question. And it's really good that they do help in the schools. Any other questions? Got about a minute left.
You mentioned other schools in Nigeria, other Christian schools.
Yes.
Are they the result of the students?
No, Obama Christian School was one that's, I don't know how far it is away from ADU. That's where ADU originally began. He was the principal there at that school and decided to branch off and put a school, build another school further out in the jungle. But I'm aware of Oban Christian School. I think there's some preaching schools over there. There are, but all these schools are in the south, right? Yeah, you can't have a Christian school up in the northern part of Nigeria because they would burn them out, they would kill everybody. That's my time, isn't it? If you got any questions, feel free to see how you do a meeting between the class and service and afterwards if you need to. Thank you so much again for your support and your prayers and what's needed.